second. Okay, great. All right. So today is November 5th. This is the meeting of the Littleton Station Area Committee. And we'll go ahead and get started with board business. So I don't know, did everybody have a chance to review the minutes from the August 31st, September 9th, and September 23rd, and October 14th meetings? And if so, do you have any changes you'd like to see made?
No, they're all good with me.
They're good to me.
Okay, good to me. So
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes for September 9th and October 14th as written.
Second?
okay, all in favor, please say aye. Mark?
Yeah, I said aye. Oh,
Okay.
yes.
Matthew?
Matthew is aye.
Okay, Delise is aye.
Thank you. So that was all 4 sets of minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, board member updates or staff updates. Does anybody have anything new to report as it relates to this committee?
I would just suggest that we have a really good consultant ready to go.
Okay. All right. No public input. So,
Hands raised at this point.
okay.
Well, I have one more board member, maybe an update, maybe. Chuck and I spoke about the possibility of having Mr. Long hire Keith if we do decide we want to use Keith for this project to see what betterments and monies we can get from the state so that we don't have to pay for it, that we could use Keith's expertise if we need it. I still think Joe, if you were here, Joe, would do a fantastic job, and I think Tony, Anthony, when he comes along, will be fine, but it might not be a bad use of Mr. Long's funds to actually have him use Keith to see what other state agencies can help us out with this project. So when he gets back, I guess he's on vacation. When he gets back, I will approach him about the possibility of doing that.
So who's on vacation? Keith?
No, Mr. Robert Long.
Oh, Robert Long. Okay. I think that's a great idea. I mean, we keep hearing that the state is behind this and Littleton can be the poster child and blah, 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 blah. But meanwhile, where's the money? How are they going to help us? So I think that's,
I think
can
Keith
help us.
has the ability to shake the trees better than anyone else. So.
Yeah. And
rather than have us pay for it because we only have the money and we're going to probably use it all on Dotson and Flinker. Actually, we should get them to change their name, but besides that, we'll be using the funds for that. So it makes more sense. And I don't want to speak for Chuck, but we discussed it, and he thought it was a great idea as well.
okay, great. So do we know when Mr. Long will be coming back?
I have a call. I have left him a message, but I just found out he was on vacation. So
Okay.
find out when he's due back, and maybe kind of a brief discussion with him about it.
Sounds great.
So that's my update.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on to the, let's kick off and let's hear what our illustrious consultant has to say. Turn it over to you.
Am I starting this or are you going to say anything, Marion?
I would say welcome, and Delisa shared that she has to get off the meeting.
And Maren, sorry, I meant to mention that I was able to move my next call to 4 o'clock, so I'm good.
Awesome.
Damn.
Okay.
You couldn't say you're getting up early, could you, Delisa?
But anyway, Peter Flinker of Dotson Flinker has a presentation ready to help the discussion. It'll include some input that he's looking for from us, and just it also includes an overview of the process, everything we need, hopefully everything we need to get done between today and spring town meeting. And also working with the state to get a 40R district put in place.
Right. We haven't all scoped it all out in that much detail, but I'll talk about it in kind of an outline. So I'm going to share my share my screen and turn on this PowerPoint. Can you all see that?
Yep.
So here's our site, or part of it from the air. In talking to Mara in the last couple of days, sort of realized there's a lot of process involved with the 40R process itself, and so we thought it'd be useful to sort of start with an overview of how that's going to fit into the schedule for the next few months, as she mentioned, and what the requirements are. So I apologize because it's a few lists of things. So here's our agenda for today. Obviously, we've done the board business. We want to talk a little bit about the goals and objectives and the previous or current Station Village concept plan, talk about how the sort of recent development proposals for the site fit into that, think about the status of the key parcels, and then get into sort of how much detail do we really want in terms of these design guidelines, what do we feel is appropriate for this site, and then talking about, again, the contract status and the schedule going forward. But backing up a little bit, this is the sort of the process that's stipulated by state statute and the regulations that are administered by DHCD. So the first part of the process is what we're engaged in now, which is starting the draft zoning bylaw and design guidelines. We already have a draft of the zoning bylaw, and we'll talk more about that. But that's sort of the first step. And then what they require is a preliminary public hearing, which we could probably have in January, February. This is basically to make people aware of the process, to make sure that that everyone has a chance to provide input and there's no major problems. And then there's an application to DHCD, which is probably the single biggest bit of business that has to be done. It's got number of pages, and I'll talk a little bit more about what's required for that. Nothing that's too hard, but just a lot of busy work. And then after that, the DHCD reviews the application, and they look at all the materials, the draft materials, and then they issue, if they approve, they issue a letter of eligibility. And then following that, the town goes forward with the usual rezoning process, with whatever hearings are necessary for that, and then adopting the zoning, hopefully at town meeting. And then that's shown to DHCD. They issue a letter of approval, and then you're ready to go. And then your local approving agency, whichever board is responsible, will approve local projects. And then one of the things which you're probably aware of is there's a lot of ongoing reporting and documentation that's required of the town going forward. So they don't want to give you the money and then just walk away. They want to make sure that that money is well spent. In terms of the application requirements themselves, a lot of it is pretty familiar from other state requirements, but basically they want to know where the district is and to have a location map of the district and sub-districts if we have those. And then within the district, which could comprise the entirety of certain parcels, they want to see which areas are actually developable and know how big those are. So if you create a district that includes a lot of wetlands and steep slopes that aren't buildable, they want to know that, half the site might not be buildable, but there's enough acreage to have a significant benefit. And then part of that is showing existing homes on the site, and then potential homes under the underlying zoning. As you know, the 40R is an overlay district, and the underlying zoning remains in place. So they want to see what's called a build out, essentially, of what could you build now under current zoning. And then that will be contrasted with the smart growth plan. Now, the smart growth plan is really an outgrowth of our earlier report. I think probably the conceptual plan that we have can serve as the smart growth plan. And then the question is, how does that turn into the zoning map? Because then the next part of the application is the proposed zoning bylaw, a zoning map, and the design standards. So the zoning map itself could be more or less, well, probably less detailed than the actual smart growth plan. That's something I want to talk to you about today. And then finally, they want to see support for all of this in the town's comprehensive housing planning documents, whatever those are. So that could be the official housing production plan and or the comprehensive plan and any other plan processes that have been going on. Any questions so far? Y'all need a cup of coffee?
So Peter, the only question I had was the application requirements. These are the application to DHCD.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
So this basically is going to be the scope for what the town has to do to actually implement the district.
Thank you.
So in order to get approval, they'll be looking at that list of applications or that application list, all that material, and be judging it according to these general requirements. So first, is it an eligible location?
Hang on a second, Peter.
What's that?
Hang on a second.
We can't hear you.
Yes.
What's the matter? They can't hear?
No, we can't hear. Ron's gonna shut the door now.
Oh, okay. So I don't have any problem hearing. Do you, Matthew?
No, maybe is it just noisy in 103?
Yeah, okay, we're
Oh,
good
okay.
now.
We're good.
Okay.
You ready to go? All right. So the approval requirements or criteria that they use to judge the application, they want to see that it's an eligible location, which it certainly is because it's immediately adjacent to the train station. They want to see that you've planned for enough density on the site, which, as you know, is 8 units an acre for single family, 12 for townhouses, and 20 for apartments. They want to see that you've stipulated the 20% affordable housing minimum, which is housing that's affordable to households earning less than 80% of area median income. They want to see that you have a rational plan review process, that you've stipulated all of that in the zoning. And then for the plan itself, they want to see that it will work for diverse populations. And so from what I can tell, this means different household sizes, different ages, different incomes. Obviously, the incomes is covered by the affordability requirement. They want to see accessibility for enough of the units. So basically, so it, different numbers of bedrooms and so on. So it's not just catering to one population. They stipulate that there can't be a town moratorium, which would restrict the speed of development. They want to see occupancy restrictions on affordability so that only people who meet the affordability requirements can actually live there. It has to comply with the state and federal fair housing laws. Then an interesting part that needs to be, well, logically, from their perspective and yours, it has to be serviced or serviceable by appropriate infrastructure. So either the developer or the town has to have a plan in place showing that they can build this stuff, including the infrastructure to service it. So does it have town water? They would want to see, I think your water department has already weighed in on whether there's water supply, They'd also want to see that there's the capacity for wastewater treatment, and that roads have the capacity to handle the traffic, etc. And then finally, they require that the overlay zoning for the 40R is all inclusive, that you don't have to go to any other sections of the bylaw. You don't have to go, well, other than the logical ones, but none of the developer doesn't have to use any of the underlying zoning to make this happen. It's all part of the 40R district. So that's a quick overview of a lot of stuff. Any questions about that? So, which brings us to design standards. So this, again, I apologize for all the text, but I thought it would be useful, if you haven't already, to look at what's actually in the statute governing the design standards, since that's what we're starting out with. And it's kind of interesting to see how they phrased it. So obviously the city or town may adopt, in accordance with the regulations of the department, design standards. The project's undergoing review by the approving authority to ensure that the physical character of the development within the smart growth zoning district, or starter home zoning district, which is another related use, is complementary to adjacent buildings and structures and is consistent with the city or town's comprehensive housing plan or housing production plan, if any, and any applicable master plans or plans for the city or town. So what this means from a zoning perspective is they want to see that connection between the planning process and the goals that the town has for the site and the design standards. So this is kind of a way to choose between design standards, which some people might, consider frivolous, like every house should be, have gingerbread molding, to ones that are more important to achieving the town's goals as stated in its plans, regulations. So they also list what the standards may address: scale and function of buildings, alignment and grade of streets and sidewalks, type and location of infrastructure, location of building and garage entrances, off-street parking, protection of significant natural site features, location and design of on-site open spaces, exterior signs, and buffering in relation to adjacent properties. So it's interesting, a number of these things relate to the open space and how the site, relates to the surrounding land, and also to protection of features on the site, which I think in this case is going to be important, right? Because there's quite a lot of that site which is directly abutting existing homes and the highway, and there are some features on the site which are probably more sensitive. So this essentially will be our outline as we go forward with the guidelines.
Those guidelines, is that it? Or can you, is it strictly that list? Do they define it?
They don't say it's restricted to this list per se, but this is the list they have.
Okay.
And most people, I think, start with this. And I think if we're adding a lot of extra stuff, we're going to have to show them why. And again, make that connection between the guidelines and the plan. So if we think that this list is not enough, if we want to get into more detail, we just need to justify it by that connection. And then finally, this is an interesting statement: a smart growth zoning district, the standards shall provide for high density quality development, the character of building types, landscapes, and other city or town features traditionally found in densely settled areas of the city or town, or in the region of the city or town. So this will be an interesting test when we get the design guidelines written up as to what's the character that we're after. Because as we discussed earlier when we were doing the master plan process, there's kind of an essential conflict between what developers can afford to build and what the market will support, and the, certainly the colonial or historic tradition of towns like Littleton, right? You didn't traditionally have 60 by 150-foot apartment building or a 300-foot long apartment building. But that's the kind of development which a developer is probably going to need to put in to make this economically viable. So the question is, how do you make that something that has the character of Littleton or other towns in the region? Is it enough to just put a colonial facade on a 300-foot long building? Do we need to make that building look like 20 smaller buildings by breaking up the facade? So that's a lot of what we'll be, I think, wrestling with. So this is another one which obviously they're trying to be very careful with that idea of economic feasibility, not to have standards that are so strict as to drive the cost of projects up to the point where they're not economically feasible. So design standards shall not unreasonably affect the economic feasibility of proposed projects. And they may disapprove a request for the determination of eligibility after they look at your zoning and the design guidelines if they seem to be adding unreasonable costs or unreasonably impairing such feasibility. I think one of the things they talk about in the guidance is if you have a developer involved, the developer basically asserts that they can afford to build according to design guidelines that the town has created, right? And if there's no developer involved, they want to see some expert weigh in and say, yes, we could build this and it's not going to drive the cost of the buildings to $1,000 a square foot or whatever. It might kill the project. Any questions or thoughts about that? All right. So that's the official language, which is sort of shaping this process. On the DHCD's website, you can read all of the full statute. You can read all their guidance and the official regulations, which talk about all of this stuff, and that's what the town would be following as we go forward. So here's our site. I wanted to sort of back up, partly for my own reasons, sort of back up and look at where we ended up with the previous master plan. As you know, we were looking at a site that extended all the way down to Taylor Street. Right now we're focusing on the areas north of the train station. As you recall, we discovered there's quite a few constraints between the arrangement of streets and the sort of awkward intersection of the highways and the train and Foster Street and the sloping site and the steep slopes, all of which sort of led to this. Now, this was a quick sketch plan that we did sort of illustrate the way different uses could be combined on the site to try to create a more of a walkable village feeling. So as you recall, we have sort of mixed-use buildings near the train station, trying to preserve and extend as much the parking as we can for commuters, and then a road which crosses the wetland, and then have the densest parts of the development closest to the station. So we sort of had a collection of apartments, and then the road continuing through and becoming a little less dense with cottages and townhouses, continuing over to townhouses by the Neshoba Life Care facility, and then connecting to their entrance road to create a second means of access. So this plan was done quickly, but one reason to do this plan is to put some of those design goals in place. And even though it's pretty sketchy, it does illustrate a lot of the things which we'd want to see in the project. So if we have new mixed-use commercial buildings, we'd want to have those as close as possible, or at least on the street side with the parking behind them, right near the train station. So you've got a sense of arriving at a real sort of village center. Instead of looking at a giant parking lot, you're looking at interesting buildings, you're seeing what's going on. It's more inviting, it's more attractive, and the parking is screened in the back. One of the principles is that we have kind of a rational road system that serves as the spine for the whole project, right? So even though you have separate development types, they're all unified according to this single sort of circulation diagram. So there's a main road that goes all the way through. It arrives at a sort of a park space up here, if you can see my cursor. And then that space is kind of the hinge between the higher density apartments, the townhouses, and the cottages. So it's sort of a traditional sort of town planning principle that you create these shared spaces that literally become the focus for multiple different neighborhoods. And then the streets themselves, again, we're trying to have the parking behind the buildings, whether they're apartments or townhouses. So you have that traditional streetscape that you're driving or walking through, and then the parking is conveniently located on little alley lots behind the townhouses, parking lots behind the apartments, and so on. So already we're starting to get some design principles which we'd want to apply to any development. The relationship to open space is another one. Here we've got the wetlands, which are this shaded color. Those have to be protected by state law. One of the design principles is to buffer the wetlands with additional open space as is possible, and then extend that from just a little space in the middle surrounded by development to a continuous greenway that runs through the site, incorporates a buffer up against the existing development, and perhaps could accommodate a bike path or a walking path that goes through the whole site. So that becomes the kind of design principle that no matter what people are developing in the end, we could say, we want you to create a continuous greenway that incorporates land that has to be protected with other land that should be protected and also can be served for or perform some recreational functions as well. So that's really the purpose of doing these kind of sketches, is to start to see what fits on the site in different areas and how should it relate, how should different areas relate to each other, how should they relate to the road system, and how can we take advantage of this site to create something that's more than just a little pod of development surrounded by woods. So that was the basis for this plan, which was sort of stepping back and saying, what are the general areas that we want to have development? Where do we want to have open space? And generally, how do we want different densities to be arranged? So we have mixed use at the station, which would include commercial and residential uses. We have apartments sort of next in terms of distance from the station, and then the lower density townhouses and garages further to the north. So this was, since we're focusing on the north side, this is sort of turned to look at it the way we looked at some of those other plans. And so it incorporates the idea for the road system, again, trying to make it continuous connections all the way through, if possible, to have a looping road system that connects the different parts of the site, so it's not just a bunch of dead ends, and it's easy to find your way around, and there's a sense of orientation and wayfinding. That green line is sort of capturing the idea of a continuous multi-use trail system that would connect from the station up to Harwood Ave and south to the Taylor Street Village Center, if that gets created. And then that idea of sort of continuous networks of open space rather than just leftover areas. It's really figuring out what's the most significant thing we can do with the open space we have in terms of buffering, protecting the stream corridor, providing a setback against the highway, and so on. So we didn't really get a chance to talk about where where you all stand with this plan. Is this still what you want to see on the site? And what have you been discussing, if anything?
Mark, I didn't know if you wanted to weigh in on some of the earlier plans or.
Yeah, so I see the whole buildup, but we're not gonna show this whole for our town meeting. We're gonna start with a smaller version of this, I hope.
Well, but are we? I thought we decided we were going to talk. Well, we were just going to talk about right around the train station.
Train station stuff for starters.
Yeah.
But as far as what we saw earlier were the apartments in the back, single-family homes and some senior housing closer towards where the nursing home is, right?
Right.
That's sort
Right.
of like that, something along that line.
Right. So that's still the approach we're taking, which brings up, I see that Joe Layton has joined us. Have we heard anything back from the Life Care Center?
No, we haven't. So that's one of the things that, still need to make sure that there's that corporate connection to see as far as their willingness to sort of play ball. I think one of the things is that looking to maintain on the property and then sort of thinking about then what they may view as what would be in their interest to then develop on their property. I'm just looking at the plan that's on the screen.
Right, but I guess, Joe, what we were, have you followed up with them again?
Yes, I mean that's one of the fun things with corporate is you, or at least my experience with them is that you get to the person, you leave a message, and then you end up calling them back again. Yep, we got your message, and we'll put it in on the voicemail. And I need to try to get a actual mailing address to them, like send some sort of more formal letter. So.
But didn't you, I'm sorry to keep interrupting here, but didn't you,
Yeah.
you had been given the name of somebody. So has a call been made to that person?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Because I'm
She's asking if you have called the person who.
correct.
Yes.
Yes. I just haven't gotten a call back.
Okay, but so have you called that person again?
I've called them twice.
Okay. So your thought is next to send a letter?
Yeah, as an introductory, I think one of the questions ends up being, is there anything that we want to include as far as like any planning documents as far as supporting, looking for participation, if it's just short and sweet, so any sort of thoughts as far as what would be with an introductory letter, if anyone had any thoughts, feel free to drop an email to me so that I can start preparing a draft.
Is there any way to get the person's email address as well?
Yeah, I'll ask for that.
Because I
And,
think,
when I contact the office, I'll see if it's something that I can try to get.
yeah, I mean, if we have the person's name and it just seems like we've been trying to get hold of these people for a couple months now, or really longer than a couple of months. And we maybe need to kind of light a fire here and do an email, send out an email, as well as maybe we send something FedEx to the person's attention. And let's get in front of them because this is a pretty important piece. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of one of the linchpins of what we're trying to do out there. Is to get them on board.
So we can't afford to lose any more time here.
So, I mean, but that does raise a question because if they say no, are we just abandoning this? I mean,
No,
it seems that just the property, just the yellow, orange, and red that we have there, that's enough to at least, because we're dealing with one property owner, move forward on that. And it may be something that we're able to introduce the Life Care Center, but there's the chance they could say, that's not in our long-term interest. And
Yeah, but and that may very well be. I prefer not to approach it in that manner. I prefer to think that, you know what, they're going to see the value in this, because I certainly would if I owned that piece of land. So I can't imagine they wouldn't be willing to at least have discussions with us. But I think we've absolutely got to get in front of them.
Can we send them a certified letter?
yeah, we can send a certified.
Why don't we send them a certified letter about potential zoning changes and ask them to contact the planning board, or contact you.
Okay.
Why don't we do it that way?
Okay.
Certified letters usually get somebody's attention. They always get mine. Okay, so but going back to what we were talking about, I always thought the thought was to start with the red, the orange, and the yellow, and obviously the purple too. Come up with that, the apartments, the senior housing,
Starter homes.
what?
Starter homes.
Starter homes, the littler starter homes, that kind of stuff. So you're on the right track with that. I just don't think we want to go much further than, and we don't want to go with 8,000 units and all these acres and everything else. We're destined to fail if we come up with a too grandiose scenario for up there. So.
Yeah, and I think too that the more we focus on emphasizing that we're creating diverse housing stock, that it's mixed use, it's apartments, and it's townhouses and cottages, I think the greater our chances will be.
Right. One of the design guidelines is what we show at town meeting, right? Which seems silly, but we should consider the right mix of things that will appeal to people to vote for this in the area that we want to start with. So if it's commercial mixed use and apartments, yeah, maybe we want to put some starter homes in instead of apartments, right?
Yeah, but do we?
Well,
I thought we decided we do not need more single family homes. We really need our apartments, townhomes, and cottages.
Well, I meant cottages, starter homes as in very inexpensive single family homes, or maybe they're row houses, or, I don't know.
First time home buyers.
Yeah.
See, I think that will scare people if we phrase it that way, because they're going to start thinking schools. And if you think back to what we're looking to do and to diversify, we're looking to appeal to the young and the older and look at smaller units.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, we could stipulate 1 bedroom.
No.
No.
We can?
No.
But also, like, a lot of single people would want to have 2 bedrooms or a couple.
Okay. Anyway, we don't have to get in the weeds on that, but yeah, one of the things we have to think about is what we show people. And
they call it workforce housing. That's the word we want. Workforce housing.
Workforce housing.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, people that are just going to pay taxes and spend money but won't require any services.
Right.
We hope.
And remember, we're also really focusing on the fact that it's right next to the commuter rail. So what kinds of people will want to live near that?
Right.
That amenity. So does that answer your question, Peter? Kind of that what we want to emphasize here and our focus?
Well, just so this, we talked earlier about the different plans the state wants to review. So this sort of serves as the smart growth plan, right? This is the town's goal for the whole neighborhood. And we can share the master plan report with them, and they'll see all the background. They'll see the public process that you went through. They'll see the descriptions and discussion of infrastructure and things that need to happen. And all that will provide great support. So the question then is, what is the zoning map that goes with the zoning bylaw for the 40R district? So from what I'm hearing, it probably would be a less extensive version of this, perhaps. It certainly won't go south of the railroad tracks. It sounds like you'll be working with Neshoba to figure out whether we'll include their property at all, or perhaps the town, you'll just decide we want to put it in there without them deciding either way. But so it sounds like you're comfortable with having the apartment district at 20 units an acre, the townhouses and cottages at 12 units an acre, which is what's required by the 40R statute, and then probably not have any units at 8 units an acre. It would just be the 20 and 12.
I guess, yeah, we could look at that, build out what that scenario looks like.
Well, actually, some of the development proposals that the previous owner and the current owner, I guess, came through actually show something pretty similar, so we can look at those. This was the base survey of the property from 2009. And it shows the wetlands that were surveyed at that point. So we're crossing diagonally across the site. And that dashed line is the wetland, I guess the 100-foot setback. Yeah. This was a 2009 plan for a garage that would be built just behind the existing MBTA parking lot. 3-deck garage. This was a plan that was done in October 2017, which shows apartments in the back, each of which is 100 units, I think that says. So 300-unit apartment buildings with a parking lot in the middle, and the wastewater systems on the low end next to 495. This shows a parking lot, a new parking lot adjacent to the railroad tracks, the top of the screen, and then a collection of smaller single-family houses around a loop road in the lower right. And then a mixed-use building up by Foster Street over here. And then a road that loops in, which is not very easy to see on this scan. So this plan would probably comply with the 40R district guidelines. This is probably 8 to 10 units an acre. This is 20 units an acre. Of course, it depends how much space around those buildings is included. But it's sort of the starting point, right, for that density. This is one which is a lot more carefully thought out, I think, which was done in February 2018. It also has a retail building up along the street with parking in the front and the side, the road coming in as a boulevard and then curving around, crossing the wetland, and then coming into another road that winds through the property, provides access to small, what they're calling single and duplex residential units with a turnaround. And then the apartments sort of, I guess they would step down the hill within the buildings, and then a larger parking lot up against the tracks, and then parking wrapping up around and behind those apartment units. And then smaller, what they call 4-story mid-rise units in between the larger apartments. So this is probably also a density that's compatible with the 40R requirements of probably something like 10 to 12 units an acre for the single family and 20 units an acre for the apartments. And then this final plan is I think done on behalf of the current owner from last year in October, and a similar kind of program in terms of the layout. So a mixed-use building, a retail building, I guess not mixed use, just retail up along the street, more parking for the retail, parking that would enhance existing parking by the station, a boulevard that comes into a traffic circle, and then a connection to a townhouse village. I think in the center, a clubhouse and green space, and then larger apartments over by the highway. So again, I don't know if they calculated units per acre, but from the plans that we were working on, which were pretty similar in terms of program, again, I think this would comply with the 40R requirement.
How many units are in that proposal that's in front of us now?
So it's 228 residential units plus 70 townhomes. What I see.
The round number is 300 units.
Right. So 228 apartments, 70 townhomes.
What's that little yellow building? Is that like a senior center or something in the middle there?
They're calling this a central club. Let's see.
Okay.
Club community center.
Right. Oh, here it is, 12,000 square foot club community center. So yeah, so the residential part, there's a 12,500 square foot club. There's a 70 townhomes over here, and then 228 units in apartments. Whoops, over here. Sorry.
If I recall, one of the questions when this was first floated was on the townhouses. I tend to think of those as multi-level units. Each unit has several levels, which tends to be kind of restricting as to who can live there. Can just help us think about how else townhouses could be laid out to accommodate different age ranges.
There's a lot of senior communities that have one-story attached units, which could be townhouse style like this, where you have 3 or 4 or 5 linked together, sharing walls, or they could be pairs or triples with some shared walls. Typically, a lot of seniors like the 2 levels anyway, as long as they have a bedroom on the ground floor, and then use the upstairs for guest space or office space.
Okay, maybe that's just my older thought process about what a townhouse used to be.
Yeah, it does typically, I mean, the point of it is to make efficient use of the footprint. So typically they do go up at least 2 stories, but there's lots of different designs.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because we still want single family or single units for
Single level?
Single level, if the seniors want to downsize or going, they don't want to go into an apartment, they want to still have their own house, so we want to still have the flexibility to have something. Some of the ones I've seen where the end units are the single story and the middle are second, they have 2 stories to them, just to kind of break up the massing a little bit that way. Just a thought, I mean, this is obviously the detail we're going to get into more as we get closer to Springtown meeting.
Right. I mean, it's tricky because what you're presenting to the town meeting is some version of this plan. And if this becomes essentially the zoning diagram with an overall district and then sub-districts stipulated for apartments, townhouses, cottages, whatever, people at town meeting are going to want to see, well, what does that mean? And the developer may or may not be ready to share something that complies with all this, because that's a lot of work to come up with a detailed plan. So probably what it's going to be is examples of different kinds of development.
Correct.
Now I showed you, I think, was it a year ago? I sent some case studies or some examples. Let me just see if I can pull those up. Here it is. I sent you this plan, which was the revised over plan. And no, I guess this was the original, Right. This was the original. This was the revised plan we've been talking about. And then these were some different character examples. Do you remember seeing this? I can send it to you again. But this was sort of the answer to the question of what is the, what did people say that they wanted in terms from the master plan workshops, and what do we think is the right fit for this? So this was an attempt to start that.
Yeah, I think this is all in Judy Barrett's report.
Right.
Yeah, Peter, I think you drew several of those out also in your slide deck, if I remember.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I started them with the slides and then put together this thing.
Right.
So these are mixed-use buildings, which we think probably appropriate, buildable, and desirable in terms of what we heard in the town. I think this one from Red Brook Village in Plymouth was the highest rated in the visual preference surveys. Obviously, people like something that looks like a 200-year-old building. Probably not entirely realistic from a development standpoint, unless you're doing a master plan community like Red Brook Village, perhaps. I think some of these others, like this Capitol Square project in Providence, are probably more buildable from a development perspective. I mean, it's a very nicely detailed building, but still pretty simple in terms of the basic structure of it is a big box, right? With a lot of articulation in the roof line. And that means it's affordable to build. But some of the design intent that we would maybe want to put into the design guidelines are having a lot of transparent glass on the ground floor so you can look in and look out, having a nice pedestrian relationship between the building and the street, sort of creating a nice pedestrian space with a lot of trees. This is another one down below, the Manchester example of they actually designed it to look like an old house that had been added on to. And the little awnings, the sort of traditional windows, traditional trim, and so on. West Acton, which you may have visited, they put sort of smaller, more articulated buildings up along the street and have a larger mass of a building behind with the parking set down the hill, and so on. Let's skip over this and talk about, this is some examples of townhouses. I mean, the top one is very much the sort of traditional townhouse, right? From all over New England, sort of lined up, shared walls. Everybody has their own entrance and stoop. And they work very well. And they're attractive. But there's lots of other kinds of townhouses. This one on the bottom, the Avalon project in Cohasset, they've got garages integrated into each building. And this is really more like attached single-family houses, right? A little bit wider. Probably not so many in a cluster, so there's more corner units. They turn them this way and that to have a little bit more variety and make it feel more like you're living in a house rather than in an urban townhouse. And then lots of options in between. I think I chose some of these examples from Middlebury because it's kind of a rural setting, but they were showing how you could have multiple units sort of with, lined up like a traditional townhouse, but disguised as a single larger building. It's just you have multiple entrances underneath that porch. Here's some other examples. Sort of getting at, this is the cottage idea where you're getting the same kind of density you might get with a townhouse community, but the buildings are actually a little bit separated apart. So at the top you have quite small buildings clustered close together. And the thing that makes most cottage communities work is that all the parking is off to one side in a separate parking lot, right? But you can actually achieve then densities for the developed part that are 16, 20 units an acre because you're putting these small buildings close together.
See, I think like those, Mark, that's what I consider like cottages. I probably wouldn't even call them workforce because again, I think that these kinds of cottages would appeal to more the senior 55 plus as well as younger families. And I think if we call it workforce housing, then it almost eliminates that senior element.
See a little bigger here. Yeah, so the cottages are extremely popular. They sell really well.
Yeah.
You do typically have, they appeal to people who don't mind walking from the parking lot to their car. But there's also been a lot of sort of hybrids done where you have the parking behind the building like you might in a townhouse, but it's still a small cottage house kind of style. Now, this one in Medfield, this old village square, which is quite a nice project with beautiful streetscape and a shared town green. But these are, good sized houses. They're just quite close together. And the reason this works is if you look at this plan, there's an alley behind the buildings with parking in the back. So everybody has an attached garage like a traditional house, but instead of it being front along the street, it's in the back on the alley. And,
it's kind of like that new development at Devon's. Well, it's not that new now. It's probably a couple years old. I can't remember what it's called, but they're set up just like that.
There it is.
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So in this case, they have a little, almost a shared driveway behind the buildings with the garages in the back. But again, the key design element of this is what you get on the right? So it's a really nice streetscape, a little bit of on-street parking, a lot of trees, nice sidewalks, but no interruptions with cars parked in people's driveways, the driveways themselves. So you have much more green space. It's much more attractive. And if you like that sort of thing, you like it.
Yeah.
Which I do. So you could sort of see in both of these pictures the goal of this.
Yeah, and Emerson Green is sold out too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they sell well. They're, because you're getting a pretty high density, these are probably at least 8 to 10 units an acre. You're spending less on development costs. You don't have to pay so much for the land per unit. And you're saving on road length, utilities, and all the rest. And that's what makes these work well, as opposed to having to buy what's a building lot in Littleton now?
1,000 easily.
It adds up. So all of these ideas we can incorporate very easily in the design guidelines in terms of this goal for a beautiful streetscape, and then specific standards for how many trees, how big a sidewalk, relationship between the buildings and the road, provision for porches, and so on. And then here's some apartments. So these are kind of typical, somewhat mid-level in terms of price apartments. But basically, you get what you pay for in terms of apartments. Like the one on the lower right is probably more affordable, more buildable for a developer, probably in a market like Littleton. But it also incorporates a lot of design features which we could bring into the design guidelines, like articulating, they call it articulating the building by separating it with these bump outs, separate colors, sort of dividing the facade. See how all of these make an attempt to lower the apparent mass of the building by breaking it up vertically and horizontally with bands of color, different kinds of materials. And then there's some simple things like traditional window proportions. So rather than having a big, ugly square window, you take 2 sort of traditional rectangular windows or 3 and put them closer together. And it just looks more, well, it is more of traditional design. And so it looks more like it fits. And of course, articulation of the roof line. And one of the differences you have here is on the lower right, you have a big shoebox with a peaked roof on it. But basically, you could take that roof off and have a flat roof, and it would be the same building, as opposed to these probably more expensive examples on the top, where the apartments on the third story, the fourth story, are actually incorporating those as traditional elements. So in the apartment, you have a dormer. Can you see the difference? And that makes a big difference on the price for developers, but also something that can be incorporated in the guidelines in terms of trying to avoid just putting a roof as a hat on a shoebox, and instead having a roof that incorporates the articulation of and the uses on that upper story. What else do I have here? Oh, here's some other ones. So you see this student housing in Middlebury, which is essentially apartment, but they broke it up into 2 units, both of which have more or less the proportions of traditional buildings, even though they're quite large, rather than being a single monolithic slab, right? So breaking up the mass into units of smaller sizes. The lower right, again, breaking up the mass vertically and horizontally with bump outs. And then within the building, it's basically, the builder is framing this out as a bunch of cubes, but then sort of integrating roof elements that break it up and make it feel more like a traditional building.
Sorry, I think these are some really great examples. I think we should keep moving on because it is 3:30 and we need to be finished by 4. Does anybody have any questions about any of these styles Peter has presented?
I just think we'll probably suss it out more as we get further down in the process and we come up with densities and look and feel.
Right. Well, so the question for you again is, we need to, for the zoning map, identify the areas that we want different uses to be in. Well, I guess one question is, do you just draw a border around that entire parcel and say that's the 40R district, and say within that, we're going to give you the flexibility to design something according to your own needs, Mr. Developer, Mrs. Developer. But we want you to follow these guidelines. Or do you say there's an overall district, and then within that district, we want to have sub-districts and say you have to build mixed-use buildings near the train station, you have to build apartments in this area, you have to build townhouses, cottages in another area, and so on.
The problem with leaving it all to them is supposing we rezone this, we do the 40R, they come in and start with the apartments and then stop. Then we got apartments, and that's not the only thing we really wanted here. We wanted a mix. So I think we have to make sure that we're going to get a mix as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree.
If I recall the discussion, the town was interested in putting having apartments downslope
Oh, yeah, definitely.
on the site. So that definitely would be a sub-district. And I can't imagine, for example, on the Life Care Center, having apartments up near the driveway there.
Right.
As an absurd example.
I don't think we want to take each parcel and figure out, as become developers and figure out where we want to place everything. But I think on this one, because of the topography, we definitely want to hide the apartments down the slope of it so that you can't even see them by the time you're done. You won't even know that they're there. I guess it's the consensus. But we do want to definitely tie that we want to mix it. We don't want just one kind of housing.
Right. Well, that was the purpose of this what we call a conceptual plan. And I guess if this became the zoning plan for the 40R district, we would simply create these different colors as sub-districts, and then you would be required to, if you're in those areas, you would have to follow, use that density, and then the design guidelines would show you how the town wants you to design it, right? The 40R also allows you to stipulate where the road should go. which is, again, as shown here, and also open space networks. So I guess in summary, this, to my knowledge, could be adopted as the 40R zoning map with an overall district, which is everything that's in color, or essentially the two big lots, and then a number of sub-districts. So, but the question for you, and we don't have to resolve this today, then is, does that feel like the right mix? And
Can we get a 40R that's been done somewhere, and so that we can actually physically see what it looks like? Maybe Grafton, Joe, how you did it in Grafton?
We don't have anything that you'd be able to sort of see the end product, if that's what you're looking for.
Do you have any, maybe something that was done 4, 5, 6 years ago that will show the pre and post development of this, of the 40R property for the next meeting?
that's a really question. Well, there's lots of examples, as I've been showing, of this style of development. Most of the 40Rs that have been completed are in more urban settings. There's sort of infill projects where it's a little bit different, but yes, that's certainly, as we go forward with public hearings and so on, people are going to want to see it. I think that's
Give
an
us
excellent approach.
that way we can visualize it.
Right.
Anybody else, or we good? That's a good start, don't you?
Yeah, I'm just, so I guess the question, we didn't really conclude with these. Would you be comfortable with this kind of development?
I like that one. I'm not thrilled about it all being townhouses, but maybe some single families but it does what we were talking about, putting the apartments way in the back where you're gonna see them from the highway, but not from the street. And then a mixed use of other housing along with it. So, and I like the amenity center in the middle of it of some sort, whether it's a senior housing or whatever, but yeah. I think the retail down front, I know we all talked about it, we all want it, and I have no problem with leaving it there. That's gonna be a function of what actually works down there, you know, what makes sense to put in down there. I don't think you're gonna get a lot of it down there. Maybe a little convenience store, coffee shop. Wow.
But that's something the market will determine too.
Exactly, that's what I was trying to get at.
Yeah.
The market will decide what goes in down there.
Right. I'm fine with this, the one that we have up here, but I would like to see some cottage in there, but maybe the cottages, oh no, that would be closer over towards the Life Care Center, right?
Right.
Go back to the other one, Peter, the first one that was more conceptual.
This one?
No, keep going back some more. That one, yeah. No, yeah. So where could we put, if we've got the apartments and then townhouses, could we have an area where we had more cottages, which then could be used either for workforce or for 55 plus?
Wouldn't we want to keep that away from the senior center? If we're gonna go partner up with the senior center, we're gonna want independent or assisted living close to there, something of a bigger mass to go along with what they already have there. And then with the housing and stuff further away from them.
Yeah, so Peter, now all right, so we've looked at this, now go to the one you just had up, that was, I think, keep going. Yeah, this one. So where here could the cottages be located? Would you just take away some of those townhomes?
Yeah, any one of those circles could easily be cottages.
Yeah.
The cottages and townhouses are basically the same density. Those would fit into kind of the 12 units per acre. 40R does have another category of 8 units per acre for single family homes.
So Lisa, you gotta remember too, this is missing a piece of land. This is missing the property that's owned by Life Care. So that's why the
Correct.
dotted line's right there. There should be another piece off to the other side of it.
Right.
Correct. But this was done just by the owner of this property.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So maybe we can do something, if they do decide they want it, and I can't speak for them, but I think they'd be crazy if they did want to put something else in there, like independent living of some sort.
Right.
Higher density, smaller buildings to attach to what they have, so you can have assisted, independent, so aging places is what we've been trying to get all along, so.
So what you're saying, Mark, is that you don't think we should have, like, let's say down in the lower right corner, have those be cottages?
No, I agree they should be cottages. I'm just saying if we're going to do cottages with independent living, I'm talking about if we want to do something that has a little higher scale and a little more, has a higher density and is more for older seniors, I guess that's about
Right.
the correct way to put it. We put it on the other side of that dotted line, closer to the life center.
Yes, I agree.
Trying to be politically, not that anybody's watching us, but be a little more politically correct, I guess.
Does that help you, Peter? Give you what other information do you need from us for our next steps?
I guess what we want to do next is actually get into the outline of the design guidelines themselves. I mean, the interesting thing part about this process, that's another one. Interesting thing part about this process is that we're really jumping right into the design guidelines and the zoning. We're really not, it's not part of our scope to redo a master plan for the property. Right? So, I mean, I'd love to sit down and redesign this whole thing for both properties and show how it could work in detail like this, but that's not part of our scope. So essentially, we're going to have to identify general areas and densities, and the design guidelines will then apply to each of those areas. And then we'll try to get it so that it produces the results that we like. And
I think that's why we need to see one that's already been done, so we get a better feel for what we're talking about. Maybe a couple of them, if you can get us examples for the next meeting of the density and the bylaw and the guidelines, then it would be easier for us to wrap our heads around it.
Okay.
To me, Peter, you and I talked about this, but to me, one of the benefits we have at these two properties, at least for the 245 Foster Street, we have a very interested property owner who I'm sure will be able to provide input, if not only feedback.
Right. Now, from what I understand, a number of towns have actually worked directly with property owners or developers who have actually produced a master plan that becomes essentially the plan for the site. So that's, if they're willing to invest the money before the zoning changes, that's another nice thing to do, because then people can vote on something they know what they're going to get.
That might be a point too.
Okay.
I put this one up again because, again, this is sort of the choice that you're making. We're outlining certain areas, and again, this is including the whole site, but if you look at just the north part, that's what is represented by these totals. So basically, there's that red area is about 8.25 acres, and there's enough room essentially for 54,000 square feet of retail and commercial and 96 apartments. So essentially, you're setting the density, you're saying what you want it to look like, and the developer comes back with something that fits all of that. But you're not telling them exactly how to lay everything out. And one of the reasons we shrunk the size of the apartment area is that by limiting to 6.5 acres at 20 or 24 units an acre, then you get a known number of apartments. So this is sort of the most direct way you can control what happens on that site in terms of the outcome and number of units. And so these going forward are going to be key decisions. So meanwhile, we can continue with the the design guidelines, but you just want to keep in mind that what the town is going to vote on is a very specific zoning plan that could be something like this, or like this in terms of scope.
Right. I think we're in agreement on
Right.
that. So, Maren or Peter, do you have the design guidelines or from form-based code just as a reference?
Oh, from the Littleton Common?
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen those.
Okay.
So that's a question. I guess we'll get into that at the next meeting, as to how detailed the design guidelines should be themselves, whether or not you want to incorporate some of those form-based code elements, or whether that seems to be going too far. I think just quickly, the issue with that level of detail is that you need to agree on the design in a lot more specificity, as they did when they went through that process. So like they did diagrams and plans that showed exactly where the buildings would go and how big they would be.
Yeah, so Lisa, if I recall the discussion when we were starting this, we weren't looking for form-based code for this area.
No, I agree.
That
And
would be too prescriptive.
no, I totally agree. I just thought it would be a good reference guide, just in terms, conceptually.
Right. I think what you can do is get the developer to do that kind of detail for you, right? So that's what we'll be asking for, is show us something that is worked out into that level of detail, that shows us in 3 dimensions how the buildings relate to the street, and how the buildings are, the mix of uses between the different buildings in the development proposal, how they relate to each other, how they relate to the street, where the landscaping is, and so on. And so you're essentially asking the developer to give you the code that they're going to be building from. So it's kind of a way to get what you want without having to spend all that time trying to figure out exactly what it is up front.
Okay.
Okay, so anything else, or should we go ahead and set a time and date for our next meeting?
Do you have what you need?
I do. I would like to hear from Joe, either now or later.
Joe's napping.
Okay, let's look at calendars then. When are you thinking, Peter, you'd be ready to meet again?
Oh, probably we have probably the last week in November, first week in December is pretty open.
It's Thanksgiving, or the one that starts on the 30th.
The week after Thanksgiving, so the first, second, or third of December.
Mark, what do you think? Does that work?
Yeah, if it's COVID, I'm not traveling anywhere, so I'm around.
Okay.
I'm
So,
taking up skiing, that's for sure.
okay, so any days that don't work for people? I'm pretty open that week.
I can't do Wednesday.
Okay.
Wednesdays are so good, right?
Wednesday is the second, so.
No, Matthew said he can't do Wednesday.
Right, December 3rd, Thursday is the planning board meeting that evening, but I didn't know if we're open to daytime again
Yeah,
or not.
I am.
Sure.
I can be if I have to.
Reluctantly.
You want to do 2:30 again?
Sure.
Matthew, does that work?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we're going to say 2:30 on Thursday, December 3rd. Okay.
We're in December already.
And Maren, you'll send out a Zoom?
Mhm.
Okay, wonderful.
And then, so I would recommend we have a discussion offline about whether we should be all Zoom or partial Zoom. The setup is a little much for, just a few of us gathering in one spot. It takes a while for setup. We have to get the extra camera and all that.
But would you rather do the whole thing remote?
If we could do all of it remote, it would be a little easier on us, but that, if it's easy, if you think you have better input by being in the same room, just let us know.
Yeah, it would be easier for me to do it remote, full remote.
Yeah, it's easier during the day. It's easier for me just because it's work day and I can just kind of switch back and forth between calls. Plus, frankly, I mean, with COVID escalating, might as well try and be as safe as possible.
Okay.
So, Mark, can you? And
I don't care, I can do remote.
a cigar.
I don't have a problem at all. I wish somebody told me it was gonna be remote. I came here expecting to see 6 smiley little faces, and I didn't.
That Zoom, it was a hybrid.
That's what this was, a hybrid? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a hybrid. Okay, so
I'm fine with
Maren,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it'll be
Get that
complete.
set up, thank you.
I'm easy, I don't care.
Okay,
Yep, and so Peter, I would recommend you and Joe and I put our heads together
Yes.
sooner than later.
okay, Maren, if you need me for anything, just holler. I'm around. So,
Thank you.
okay.
All right.
I think that concludes our meeting. So somebody'd like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I second it.
It can be
Okay.
on December 3rd, how's that?
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.